Hello and welcome. The Chinese President Xi Jinping will visit Russia next week to hold talks with President Putin. Beijing and Moscow say the two men will discuss strategic cooperation. The announcement for the state visit was made by the Foreign Ministry in Beijing and by the Kremlin, which announced that a number of important bilateral agreements would be signed. And a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman has confirmed the pair would discuss the war in Ukraine. Well, joining me now is our China correspondent, Stephen McDonald. Stephen, what more do we know about this trip?
Well, the problem for Beijing, in a way, for this trip is that all eyes are going to be on Moscow, and there is some expectation that the trip by Xi Jinping to speak to Vladimir Putin might achieve some sort of a breakthrough in terms of peace in the Ukraine war. Now, whether it's fair or reasonable or not, that is going to be the expectation. And the reason for that is, firstly, that Beijing does have sway with the Kremlin. Secondly, that, you know, it's sort of fresh off this coup when the Chinese government was able to negotiate to get Saudi Arabia and Iran to re-establish diplomatic relations. And so people are going to be thinking, well, China's on a roll. Can they do this with Ukraine and Russia? I think, though, many hard heads would say that it's probably not going to happen. It seems very unlikely. And in fact, many would question whether or not Beijing really wants to do that anyway. But that said, there is going to be a lot of attention on this visit and what comes from it.
And I mean, the key question is really how much influence Beijing has over Moscow. We know there's obviously been a lot of political and economic pressure on Russia. We saw Mr. Putin speaking yesterday. And what is in China's best interests?
Well, that is a very good question. I mean, the most cynical reading of this could be that it's not really in China's interests for the conflict to stop, because at the moment Russia is really taking it up to the West, eating up all these Western resources, challenging the presence of the West in Europe, and sort of geostrategically, if you like, that kind of benefits China, really. However, it has upset global trade and those types of things, so some might say it's not in China's interests for the war to keep going. And they might also say that, you know, China did have a pretty good relationship with Ukraine before the war started. But in terms of this question of whether China is really neutral in this, you just have to look at the TV news here to see that it isn't really. I mean, the state-run TV reports here are running the Kremlin line. They're not giving their people here a dose of what Zelensky's government thinks about this war. They're not even talking about a war. They speak about a conflict in these reports, and they're certainly not describing it as an invasion. So that gives you an idea of what China's position really is on this. That said, I mean, after they've helped patch it up between Saudi Arabia and Iran, imagine what a coup it would be if Beijing could do the same in terms of the war between Russia and Ukraine. It would be quite something. And, you know, lift the government of Xi Jinping onto another level in terms of what it's seen that it could potentially achieve on the world stage.
Indeed. It's going to be an interesting few days. Stephen McDonald, thanks very much indeed.